Do you feel like you have a high level of awareness and responsiveness to the world around you? Do you feel like when you step outside, you feel a sense of overwhelm, a sense of being overly stimulated, right? In certain areas, around certain groups of people? Well, it could be because you are a highly sensitive person, an HSP. Now, to be a highly sensitive person is not a problem, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Although when you are not aware of it, it's like almost having a superpower in the comic books. If you're not aware of your power and your ability and what you can do with it, then sometimes it often appears to be a curse. But in fact, it's a gift. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive deep into what it means to be a highly sensitive person, how to identify it, and then we're going to begin to break down how to actually understand it and use it toward your purpose, toward your own fulfillment, toward you ultimately creating the reality that you want. And so as we get down into it, let's really go into understanding what it means to be a highly sensitive person. Usually it means that you are somebody who is sensitive to, light, sound, textures, perhaps. And it is often identified as something that is just focused on neurological and physical attributes, right? But we know that we are not just physical beings, right? We are actually spiritual beings. So when we get deeper into what it means to be a sensitive person, that means ultimately there is a spiritual component, a spiritual attribute that comes with this as well. Because not only are you sensitive to maybe light, sound, but you're also sensitive to energy, vibration, frequency. Sometimes you can go into a space, be around a group of people and really feel like uncomfortable, feel unease, feel heaviness, feel drastically different than seconds before you actually stepped into the room. That is because you are highly sensitive to vibration, frequency, or energies, you see? And so when you experience that, oftentimes people don't understand what it is they're experiencing. But usually with experience, with practicing self-awareness, with age, you begin to start to see patterns as to what's happening. And so what we're going to do is we're going to dive deep into trying to figure out and understand what's happening, and then identifying it in a way that allows you to also use it to your benefit and not see it as something that you just experience, but you just have no sense of purpose behind this gift that you have. So what I want you to understand is to be highly sensitive ultimately means you have a sense of deep processing, right? You have a sense of emotional responsiveness, sensory sensitivity, and also spiritual sensitivity. All these things can tend to be overwhelming for a lot of people. And so what tends to happen for people who have a sense of deep processing, they're experiencing something, and it usually takes them a while to process and even articulate what it is that you're experiencing. Because it seems almost like your body, your emotional state is feeling a sense of overwhelm. And it's not necessarily a bad, overwhelming feeling, but more so just a heightened intensity of experiences that maybe a normal person would have, or maybe a normal person won't even acknowledge having because they don't have that ability to tune into that frequency or that thing, you see, but you do. And you have to recognize that only 20% of the population are highly sensitive people and have this gift. And so for you to understand and feel like you are different, unique, special, you may even feel weird, that is okay, right? Because you are only 20% of the population that actually experience this. Now, your job though is not to identify this as something to say like, oh, there's no hope for me. I'm weird. This is a wrong thing to have, feel bad, feel awkward. I mean, that is normal in the beginning processes, but as we go through this journey together, we're going to understand that it's in fact a gift. And there's a reason why only 20% of the population have it. That's probably because imagine if the whole entire 100% of the population had this and not have the mental and the emotional intelligence to actually be able to cultivate this gift in a practical way, then the world will probably be in a lot of turmoil if everybody felt such extremes of sensitivity, right? So you have to understand that because you have this gift means that you do have the ability to manage it, right? And even master it. You just simply have to take ownership of this gift. So that way you can begin to break down putting up the walls and avoiding dealing with it, avoiding facing it, and thus just simply move forward and face it head on, accept it, receive the gift, and then that is the beginning of you mastering that gift. Okay. So when you start to recognize this sense of deep processing, and it often relates to this emotional responsiveness. So in other words, you feel something. You're not quite able to identify what it is that you're feeling. And sometimes you can, say that it's intuition, gut feeling, right? You can sometimes feel a sensation of heaviness in your head, lightheadedness. You can feel various things. Everybody, I would imagine, would be very different in their experiences of how they actually get this signal, right? You have to be understanding of the fact that your emotions are triggers, right? They are indicators to let you know something is going on. Now, you have to practice being mindful about your emotions and recognize why your emotions are being ignited, being triggered in the way it is. Because a lot of times when we think of emotional triggers, we think of the negative triggers, but there are also positive triggers, right? There is something that resonates with you that you pick up, whether it be physically, right? When we talked about before, sound, touch, textures, or it can just be simply energetic, where you pick up a vibration, a frequency, a sense of something different, right? A density in the space, in the atmosphere, in the air, something that you feel like feels different drastically, right? And it can be feeling different in the wrong kind of way or the right kind of way, but you have to be able to practice using this gift in order for you to identify what it is that you must do at the moment, right? When you start to receive these signals. So your job is to really process what it is that you're feeling, identify the emotions and what those emotions are trying to signal to you and tell you, okay? And then once you do that, you get into any sense of sensitivity or sensory feelings, like are you are you f- are you being driven to do a certain thing, right? To take a certain action? Are you being driven to think about a certain thing, right? To process and really feel like, okay, well, maybe we should go left and go right. Maybe I should, not eat this food, but eat this food, right? Maybe I should communicate and talk to this individual, right? Maybe somebody you don't know at all. You just had a random interaction with a person and you decide, or something within you is pulling you to that person, right? There's a sensitivity that is dragging you or pulling you to that person, and your emotions, right? Your feelings, your gut is telling you to communicate with that person. Maybe it is for you, for your benefit, to receive something from them, some kind of a wisdom, insight, maybe just simply an exchange of energy, or maybe it's something that you need to give to them, right? A message, a reminder, some encouragement. So you have to think about all those possibilities. Sometimes it's about getting away from people, not in a way that judges them and makes them a, crazy person or a maniac or anything like that. We're not into those labels, right? But to identify that engaging with them right now isn't the most productive and wisest thing to do. Okay. Maybe another time, right? Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next time you interact with them, you'll have a different sensation, a different, indicator or vibe to go off of. But the point is you have to trust what it is that you are being led to do by your consciousness. Remember, your consciousness is the divine spark within you, right? Is the individualized expression of that which we call God. So it is all knowing. It is all encompassing. It is all of us. It is the oneness that is us. So when you are leading and being led by that, then you're going to get different indicators of how you should be led by it. Everybody's going to be different. So though we have this broad generalization of how we should listen to consciousness, the truth of the matter is your experience is going to be different than my experience. Your job with the practice of self-awareness is to recognize what and how consciousness communicates with you. And when you understand that, then you are on the vibration or on the frequency on the path to really understanding true, right? Truly who you are, true self-realization. So when you get into really diving deep into this understanding, you're going to get into recognizing things that are going to be challenges for you, like feeling, a sense of overstimulation, right? Feeling like you can't go certain places. Like me, myself, I'm not good in that club vibration, like that club vibe. I'm not good in going to clubs because there's just too much stimulation going on for me. There's too many people, too many different frequencies of reasons why they're in the club. Some are actually having a good time. Some are actually trying to avoid, right? And mask their pain, their suffering. Then you have the loud music, right? The loud vibrations of music in the air. Then you have the lyrics of the music. So you have all kinds of different frequencies being thrown at you. Well, at least for me, right? Thrown at me that I'm picking up. Now, there are times where I can be in the moment and have a good time, but it doesn't take me long to feel like, okay, I had enough. I got to go, right? I have to go outside. I have to get some fresh air. I have to get some, exposure to a more neutral base of frequency or vibration, because I'm picking up all of these different things and it can often wear me out. So you have to recognize what that looks like for you, right? If that happens for you in certain situations, you have to understand how to deal with it, right? How to figure out where's your threshold as far as how much time you can spend in that environment. And of course, what works best for you as far as clearing out and neutralizing the energy, the frequency, the sensation, the stimulation, okay? So that way you can get back to your norm. You see, another thing that many people who are highly sensitive is the difficulty in figuring out boundaries. Setting boundaries is very difficult for people who are highly sensitive because a lot of times when we feel a sense of attraction, whether it be physical, energetic, right, emotional, there's a draw that you have to a person. Now, if that person isn't mature enough to understand their own boundaries and you wish to extend yourself out and support them because you know that's what they need, many times you can extend yourself out too much, you see? And again, just like when you pick up different vibrations everywhere, frequencies, overstimulation, even when it's with one person, you can pull, right, from that person's energy too much, where they influence and they kind of mess up, for lack of a better word, your own frequency and your own vibration in your own space. Okay. And they can wear you out. So you have to learn how to set boundaries and understanding, okay, yes, I'm here to support you, right? Because essentially you are me. But that is when the ego is very important. Remember, the ego is about creating the separation, because though we are one spiritually, as human beings, we are separate. Okay. And that is why we have the ego, because the ego is for the purposes of protecting us in this human experience. The problem is the ego gets mismanaged, it gets out of control. We don't recognize it. We don't know how to manage it and cultivate putting it in this place. So a lot of times when we are highly sensitive, we are essentially not allowing the ego to do its job. Especially when we're on the spiritual journey, we usually identify the ego as the problem and we purposely ignore it. We even try to kill it. So we don't want to do that. We want to recognize that it's there for a reason. This is why every single person has one. Your job is to understand this is what it's for, to make sure you have boundaries for your protection and also for the protection of the other person. You don't want to get to a point where you're unable to identify your issues and their issues. You don't want to take on their issues as if they are yours, and you don't want to project your issues onto them as if they are theirs, right? That is theirs. You want to be mindful about understanding you are there to support them to help themselves out of a situation and vice versa. So Boundaries is very important. That's one example of how you need to be mindful, because as a highly sensitive person, setting boundaries is something that often is difficult for many people. And lastly, you wish to manage your expectations. When we are on this journey and we are somebody who is highly sensitive, oftentimes, like I said, we have an issue, a problem separating ourselves from the other and separating our egos from the other, separating our problems from the other, each other's problems. We start to mesh with one another. The beauty is that we see the highest potentiality of that person. We see the best in them, even though they don't see it within themselves. And that often is the problem. Because what happens is, because you are seeing, right, the highest potentiality of that person, they're not seeing it themselves, and therefore they're not being it. So what you see in them is ultimately something that they don't see within themselves. So therefore they are not being it. Therefore they're not living it. They're not speaking it. They're not manifesting it. They're not materializing it. So who they are currently as they see themselves doesn't match with who you see them to be. So your expectations of them are way higher than they can even comprehend at the current moment. It is up to them to see their highest potentiality and push to achieve that, to realize that for themselves. And if they are not able to realize it for themselves, that is where you begin to clash with them, because you are constantly motivating them, inspiring them, right? Doing your best to motivate, inspire them. But it is basically you talking to a wall because they don't see that for themselves. And so at some point, what will happen is there will be such a conflict. There will be such a battle, essentially, between you, your consciousness, what you see in them, and their ego and what they believe themselves to be. And they are just unable to step out of self-sabotaging themselves. They're unable to tap in and do the shadow work to get into reframing and changing who they identify as and recognizing who they truly are. So you essentially are trying to, and with great intention, you're trying to push them to be something that they aren't, right? Because they can't see that for themselves. When we see things for ourselves, that's when we are it. That's when we truly reach the point, the beginning stages of seeing and being our truest self. But when somebody sees something within you that you don't see within yourself, there is often a conflict. Okay. So recognizing your expectations is very important, because without understanding that your expectation can often create and will often create, and it's probably the only thing that creates disappointment, then you start to understand, okay, if I don't have an expectation, now it's okay to have standards, especially when we're talking about relationships. It's okay to have a standard. But when it goes beyond standards, when it goes beyond, you know, what desire for a person, when it goes beyond seeing something and what they can be, and they're not seeing it for themselves, then it will create drama. It will create chaos for both of you. So your job is to manage that and to accept them as they are currently, regardless of what you see in their possibilities for the future. You have to look at them. You have to accept them. You have to love them. That is the best way you're going to actually support them in transforming and becoming their truest self, right? By accepting who they are now and creating a space of safety for them to simply be okay with who they are now, instead of feeling like they have to fit into a box that you, right, have created for them, essentially. So you have to be mindful of all those things. Now, this is the most important aspect of this whole conversation. Be mindful of the misconceptions about being a highly sensitive person, because the biggest misconception is that being highly sensitive is being weak, right? That you're over emotional. These things will cause you to not tap into the power of being vulnerable and connecting with these sensitivities that you have, but to shun them, to be ashamed of them, right? You have to understand, yes, if you feel highly emotional, right? If you feel sensitive all the time, if you feel a sense of overwhelm all the time, that just simply means you need to practice mastery. You haven't mastered this yet. You have to acknowledge that. It doesn't mean you get to push it away and act like it doesn't exist or assume something is completely wrong with you. So your job is to recognize that there is power in this. And as long as I recognize that, I just simply have to learn the tools to master this power that I have, because not everybody has this ability. We often look at abilities that are different than the majority as a curse, as a problem. But being highly sensitive doesn't make you weak. When you are highly sensitive and know how to use this power, it makes you one of the most powerful people in the universe. So you have to understand that emotions is what drives us. So when we think about sensitivity, we must consider and think about the connection between sensitivity to what? It's really a sensitivity that triggers emotion. So those emotions are meant to use, right, to be used towards manifestation, toward creation of that which you desire, creation of your own personal self-fulfillment, creation of your self-realization of who you truly are. So your job is to take this gift that you have of being a highly sensitive person, use it, master it, recognize that it is not a weakness, but a strength. And when you do that, then you're on your way to absolutely mastering this life, mastering this universe that you are constantly in creation of. All right. Thank you so much. Feel free to go to drabundant.com, subscribe to my daily newsletter, get access to this free ebook, and so much more. Continue to join me on this journey. Peace and abundance always.